For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gavin Morris. I'm the director of the South African Jewish Museum, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, which is the second in a three-part webinar of our Community History Online series. This series is hosted by the SAJM Museum in conjunction with the Kaplan Centre for Jewish Studies at UCT. The series came about through conversations between myself, Professor Adam Mendelsohn at the Kaplan Centre, our respective archivists, Leila Bloch and Katie Garin, and Eli Rabinovitz of the We Are Here Foundation, and today's moderator, Geraldine Auerbach. In our conversations, we came to the realization that there are many people who are interested and active in keeping the community history online alive, particularly in the online space. And as I mentioned in our first session, for those of you that were there, it's no secret that the South African Jewish community has shrunk considerably. And many of the people from these communities have been very active in trying to keep these memories alive. And we felt it was important to try to create a space where everybody working and active in this field can get to know each other, connect with each other, and learn from each other. So with that in mind, we've set up 3 sessions, each with 3 different speakers. And in each session, each speaker is going to present a different program or model or that they are working on to try and capture the history of a particular community or place or congregation. What we will do at the end of all 3 series is send an email to everybody who registered, asking if you're willing to share your contact details with others, and we will create a community, whether it be via Facebook page or just through newsletters or a email chain where people can interact and share what they are doing and connect with people who are interested in the same areas as them. If you missed our first session, there is a recording of it. It is on the South African Jewish Museum's YouTube channel. And so just go to YouTube, type in South African Jewish Museum, and it should be fairly easy to find. So with all that said, I am going to now hand over to Geraldine, who will introduce today's speakers and give you a little idea of the format that we are going to use tonight. So just sort this out, if you bear with me for a moment. Over to you, Geraldine.
Okay, I can unmute myself. Thank you. Wonderful to meet you all and to see you. I'm really thrilled to have so many people together in the room from so many places. South Africans have spread over, but you know, our roots are very important and we really love to see them and to share them. And the online platforms have provided so much opportunity. And we're thrilled to bring together people who are doing various different ways of doing it. So today we have a really wonderful panel for you, starting with my new friend, Gary Sussman. Gary has passionately set out to motivate, find, source the material, interest people who grew up in Freiburg. And he's going to tell us all about that today. Gary grew up in Freiburg, went to Boys High in Kimberley and studied at UCT. He's very involved in Habonim before making Aliyah. And he did postgraduate studies at Tel Aviv University and LSE. And he lives in Tel Aviv, married to Dorit, father of Amit, Rotem, and Galia. I will introduce the other speakers just before they speak, who will be Rabbi Ryan Newfield, who's talking about Musenberg, and JP Juan-Paul Burke, who's talking about the Woodstock and Salt River congregation. So now I'll go over to Gary. I'll make you the host so that you can share your screen, but it means you might need to watch the waiting room so that people can join as they come in. So now where is Gary? Gary, okay, Gary, you can unmute, please, and you are now the host. So unmute, Gary, so that you can.
I still can't. Okay, there I go. Okay. Now, how do I make myself the host?
You are the host, so you can share your screen when you're ready. Can I just say to people that the best way to view this thing is to view it as full screen and speaker view. So if you go take your cursor to your top right-hand corner, you'll see those options. Go to full screen and speaker view. Okay, Gary, over to you.
Goeiemiddag almal. Ek hoop julle is almal gesond. Ek vra om verskoning 2 keer. Die eerste verskoning, ek gaan in Engels praat. My Afrikaans is nie so goed nie. En ek vra om verskoning vir 'n tweede rede. As jy let something in, my Engels is ook nie so goed nie. I just want to say a big shout out to Stephen Schechter, who's from Freiburg in Wellington. Well done for getting up so early. So thanks to Gavin and the Jewish Museum and the Kaplan Centre, and of course Geraldine for putting this together. I have to admit people all the time, it's hard work. You know, it's not every day us Freiburgers get a seat at the top table. So there's a lot riding on this event for our small community. And it's really a big honor to be here. Essentially, I've built now what's become 2 websites. It began as 1, but I had to make them to 2. One website tells the story of the Freiburg Jewish community, the history, the evolution. I try and give a sense of communal life, issues of identity, assimilation. I try and sort of understand what people did commercially, socially within the wider community. And I kind of plot the rise and inevitable sad decline of the community. Remarkably, the first Jews arrived in 1884, first German Jews, and then the Kurlanders and the Lithuanians, and the rest is history, as they say. We had a smattering of German refugees and all sorts of other interesting people. And really, the Freiburg story is inextricably linked to the Kimberley story. Without diamonds being discovered and Jews coming to Kimberley, people wouldn't have moved further north. And so we're part of the Kimberley story, Cecil John Rhodes, moving, with the aspirations to go to Bulawayo and southern Rhodesia. And, the railway line being linked from the Cape to Kimberley, then Freiburg, then Mafeking, and then Bulawayo. So, I mean, we very much, I'd say, a subplot of the Kimberley story. And we sort of sit under that big tree. For those who don't know, Freiburg is in the Northern Cape, and it's the Texas of South Africa. So it's really a cattle farming area. And what I didn't know when I was starting this research is actually the raison d'etre economically was people would cut wood in Freiburg and transport to the mines in Kimberley. So that's kind of why, so again, we link to the Kimberley story. So let me just, for a second, show you just a bit about the website. So we don't have the wonderful Kimberley CHOL as our iconic site. We have the Simon Liverpool Guild Hall. So website number 1 looks at the history, and there's an about section, which is kind of something on country Jews, smosers. There's a bit on the Jews of Freiburg and useful resources. And last week, I gave people a list of kind of helpful resources there on the website. Then there's something on Freiburg's history, early Jewish settlers, and Jews in wider sort of life. So it's Jewish town councillors. Stephen's late father, Harold Schechter, was in the town council. We had some Jewish mayors. At one stage, like half the councillors were Jewish. But just to give you a sense of Freiburg history, so for example, Keith Brodowski, who grew up in Freiburg, collected these amazing postcards of Freiburg in the 1890s, and they're there on the website, and it gives you a vivid sense of what this town looked like back in the day. Then there's a sort of the history of the community. I've divided into 3 parts: 1880 to 1929, 1930 to 49, which is really the high tide. I think at peak we had about 45, 50 families, and then 1950 to the bitter end. And people like us and the Schechters, we were the bitter enders, as they say in the Boer War. We held out until it was unsustainable. In fact, last year, the last family, the Joachim's, left the district. So that's kind of a bit about the history, sort of the community. And then there's a long section of identity. So the rabbis, Jewish identity, kashrut, observance. the Passover, we used to have communal seders, a big part of our identity. The high holidays, kind of keeping a minyan. Aspects of communal life. There was even a branch of Habonim in Freiburg. The bar mitzvahs, weddings. I've got a whole section on sort of the Jews who married out, who collected wedding certificates. And then there's a section on the cemetery. My family has 4 family members buried, so we invested, as they say, or committed. And I've tried to kind of explain who the people are. Many people, or some people who buried in Freiburg weren't actually from Freiburg. So who they are, what the connection was. And then I've also got the death certificates, because there are people who died in Freiburg who weren't buried there. I have to admit one other person. Okay. Then there's a section on commerce. So Solomon Stores and Hedemann's, which were the 2 big retail stores. Other businesses, Mike Klein, the Bloombergs had jewelry stores, Bechuan and Molten Milling, the Lieberthal soap factory, Double Crown Yeast, and the hoteliers. Freiburg had 3 hotels. For many years, all 3 belonged to Jews. And we'll talk about the hoteliers. And then there's a section on Jews in the cattle industry. My late father is a farmer, so that's kind of something that spoke to me. And there's something on youth. So that's the first website. I had to develop a second website because I simply had too many pages, and Wix limits you to 100. So the second thing I did is I built a collection of family albums, and I've been trying to basically record the story of each album, of each family. So there are almost 60 pages today, and it's dedicated to each family. So I won't bore you with Sussmans. We'll give 1 slot to the Lithuanians and 1 to the Litvaks, to the Latvians, the Kurlanders. So first up will be the Davidovitz family. So basically, I do a write-up on the family, where they came from in Eastern Europe, where they went to in South Africa, and, you know, wedding certificates, family photos. This is correspondence, trying to get Zalma Davidovitz's father out of Eastern Europe. And, you know, that's Joe Davidovitz in his Kimberley Boys High blazer with his sister. And then, you know, Freiburg without the Lieberthals, we can't do. So the Lieberthals were from Talsen and really the backbone of the community. And we'll get to them soon. So I've kind of found things like in the archives, the naturalization papers, I have to admit, Debbie Myers, you know, where they were buried on their way to Freiburg. So that's kind of the second website. Okay, so really speaking, oh, more people coming in. So there are 2 websites that have been built. So in effect, I've tried to build a virtual museum, the Poor Man's Kaplan Centre or Jewish Museum, and I've used Wix. I've also used a lot of Family Search, which is the Seventh-day Latter Adventist or Mormon website. I know some people have theological issues. That's a whole separate conversation that, you know, other people can give a talk on that, but it's a very helpful resource. And I was kind of surprised it didn't get mentioned last week. But in a time of COVID, it's very helpful to kind of look at estates and death notices and all that kind of stuff. In essence, I think my work is a little bit more historical. I want to understand issues like Landsleit, Landsgemeinschaft, you know, understanding how the community coalesced, more people coming in. I'm very interested in identity, Jews who assimilated. There were Jews who had non-white partners. And, you know, these people did so not because they gave up their Jewish identity, because there just weren't enough Jewish partners, but I consider them part of the community in my research. Frankly, I totally made this up as I went along. And had it not been for COVID, I would never have done this. I had no real interest, but COVID kind of does its own thing to us. I just want to talk a bit about sort of my journey and some insights, because I think they're relevant for other people looking at this. So my first point of departure was this wonderful, I have to admit more people, document, which you all know. And inspired by a call with my brother and Izzy Lieberthal, I decided to start researching the community. And I took the Beitat Futsot list of families and just dumped into an Excel. But, you know, it's a great resource, but we don't know when the families were there and what their first names were. And kind of, it's very hard to use that resource without having the raw material. And Gavin, we're anxiously waiting for you to help us get that raw material. And then I started just tracking people down on Facebook. So I would mail people on Facebook saying, are you related to this family? Were you ever in Freiburg? And people would say, you know, piss off, or you're talking rubbish. But it was a very ineffective way of finding people. More effective began when I joined a group that's dedicated to South African Jews looking for their roots that Michelle Lurie set up, and that's been quite helpful because at least people are motivated, but you also, people send you on wild goose chases. Much more helpful is actually speaking to and meeting with a few old Freiburgers. So Joe Davidovitz in Joburg, phenomenal memory. I saw Avi Hechter on Tzora, and a woman called Gita Franco, and they actually gave me photos and more names. And then, of course, there's the Lieberthal clan and Philly Taube, and people like Maurice Joffe, and I think getting photos is kind of like my adrenaline moment, and it helped me. But at a certain point, to be honest, I hit a wall, and I was like about to give up. And then this woman from Kimberley called Geraldine Auerbach became part of my life, and she kind of slapped me 3 times and said, "Young man, don't give up." And I think it's very helpful to have a Geraldine on your quest. You need a mentor, someone to pick you up when you're down and sort of guide you. And it's really important because it's a very lonely process. And you sometimes think, why am I doing this? I mean, no one cares and whatever. So I think Geraldine's been very helpful. Another good thing that happened to me was at the time of starting my research, I'd actually reached out to a family friend who's still in Freiburg. Her name's Annie Garnett. And it began as a small favor. It always begins that way, and it became a bigger favor. So I asked her to take photos of the tombstones in the cemetery. And then Annie got drawn into the project. And then basically, she went into the local newspaper, the Stelllander, got all the back copies of the Northern News and the Stelllander. Now, that's amazing because there's no archival material. Okay, I was like with Ground Zero. I had a little bit of help from Graham Brodowski, which I'll talk about now. But, getting things like the New Year greetings in the 1930s and, adverts for Jewish businesses. And in the old days before Facebook, we had the local and general. So, the Cohens went to Kimberley for a bar mitzvah, the Sussmans had an operation, so that was very helpful. So, and actually I should say that Annie's sister, Tanya, lives in Freiburg, is very ill with COVID, and our thoughts are to her and her family. The third person who kind of I bumped into on the way and has been helpful is Paul Chaffetz. So I read Paul's dissertation on Potch, which is an incredible dissertation. And the reason I read his dissertation is the Potch community stole the Freiburg rabbi, Rabbi Kemmelman. Now, there was a time in the 50s when there was a dearth of community rabbis, and a little bit like football clubs, you would steal them. And Kemmelman was like a superstar. He actually passed away last year at the ripe old age of 102. He went on to be the head of the Beth Din in Sydney. But and Potch, we will never forgive and forget you for that. But I read Paul's dissertation, and what was very clear was it was interesting, and it gave me a sort of template to tell the story of the community, not just my own family story. And I think it's important to also put families in a broader context. The other thing that Paul did was he taught me to use Family Search. It's a wonderful resource, but you can waste time if you don't know what you're doing. And he made me very efficient at that. And I've kind of become more of an historian or a wannabe historian. And Paul has these amazing documents like the membership of the local lodge. Now, many Jews belong to the Freemasons. It's true what they say. No, I'm teasing. But so he had the membership from 1910 to 1922. And that allowed me to put a first name to a surname on the Bet Futsot list, or there were names I'd never heard of, okay? And that was like an eye-opener. Wow. So that's been, and he just sent me a document like Jewish GPs in South Africa who trained in the UK. And suddenly, I know that I found 2 more GPs in Freiburg. So I would say having an academic supervisor like Paul also helps. The fourth person who we all are indebted to is Graham Brodowski. Graham Brodowski grew up in Freiburg. His family owned one of the 3 hotels. And Graham was the keeper of the flame. He sort of kept documents like who gave money to build the shul, who paid shul membership fees. And again, when you're starting at ground zero, you have a list. Now, I had to filter through the list. Some people paid membership fees because they came to visit family, but that stuff was amazing. And Graham had also written a note on the Jewish hoteliers, and there were many. So Graham, I mean, having people who've kind of collected the research is very helpful. I'd say, and then I did a bit of research in the Cape Town archives. It was very tough. I was limited by the number of documents I could take. One more coming in. And also the Pretoria archives are shut, and I need to do more work in the archives. But you have, for example, estates and sort of bonds, and that's also important. The fourth resource was the Freiburg community. And inspired by Geraldine, I kind of adopted this approach of crowdsourcing. So I would do these newsletters, not as detailed, not as frequent, not as sophisticated as Geraldine's, but using snippets that Annie would send to me and memoirs, and the response would be amazing. People would share a memoir. They'd say, have you spoken to so-and-so? And I think this trick of Geraldine's of building a community, not just kind of being passive on the website, it's a big, big sort of trick to learn in this trade. So I have to drink, you know, it's Freiburgers, it's hot there. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are. And I'd say the community of Freiburgers, you know, it's grown. I've now 120 people on my mailing list, and it's growing. And people come around. So where are we? I need to figure out a bit more about kind of the rabbis and organized communal life. And then, to be honest, Gavin, I'm saying it again, unless I get the better sort of resources, I'm limited. I did get the Board of Deputies correspondence of the community, which is very interesting and helpful. I have about 60 albums. I'd like to get to 70, 75, and that's a work in progress. One of the things that's striking is how many families went through this little dorp. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I have 270 families in my Excel. Now I've included Kuruman and Tahung and sort of Stella. So for example, Tahung Jews came to us sometimes, went to Kimberley for certain things. They like, you know, they had it both ways. So yeah, that's very interesting. And often I would approach people, as I said earlier, and they dismiss the fact they're in Freiburg and then show them a death certificate and say, okay, maybe you're right. So what are some of my insights? So I don't think that Freiburg is unique or special. It's special to us, people who grew up in Freiburg. But I think it's, you know, it's the story of many small towns. A community came, coalesced, and then went, just disappeared. And some of us hang on for longer, but, you know, essentially, I think communities are a great lens at which to look through the history of the South African Jewish community. Migration patterns, networks, economic opportunities, what people did, issues of identity assimilation. It's not easy keeping a community. I mean, look at the correspondence, just of the CHOL committee trying to find a rabbi. I mean, you know, I think they knew it was over, but it was, they tried to pretend for us kids it wasn't, right? Essentially, the young people voted with their feet, got educated, left, and the parents followed. And I suppose in some ways, sadly, that's the story of the South African Jewish community today, right? I mean, people are leaving, and the issues Freiburg and Kimberley dealt with are going to be Joburg's issues tomorrow. So we can actually teach you now, I suppose is what we're saying. When all is said and done, what's interesting is these small communities were really a bunch of families or clans. So you had a group of families from Majayak who came and then left, and then you had the Talzen sort of gang, right? The Lieberthals, the Friedmans, the Taubes, the Immermans, the Blumenthals, and they're all intermarried, and the Edelsteins. I mean, you kind of, the thickers, if you don't understand that, you don't understand the community. And what is also important, there are a few businesses that kind of sustain the community. So many people work for Solomon Stores, Hedemans, the Lieberthal factory kind of employed their family. And once those businesses lost their mojo, it was kind of game over. This, I think, is a very personal project. There's no one way. Geraldine had her way, I have my way. I think everyone will find their own way. There's no right or wrong. You have to do what works for you. It's a lonely mission. You have to be slightly crazy. So I'm qualified ex van my loetjie getik, as they say in Afrikaans. But you kind of need to be a bit of a crazy person in the nice way. I also have less nice, crazy things about me, but it's going to take longer than you think. You know, I thought this would be a year. It's been now a year and a half. It's probably another year. But actually, time is your friend, because, you know, sometimes I look at problems or families, and a few months later come back and I solve the riddle, or there's more material on family search. So actually, you need to be patient. The cavalry is not going to come. I think there's one thing that people like Geraldine and I have learned is everyone has goodwill and wants to help. They don't come through, okay? But that's okay. Don't get upset. But don't also dismiss people. I mean, that community of people have other things they can bring you, photos, families, ideas. And so it's important, again, to engage with people. So in conclusion, find a mentor. We all need a Geraldine. Find a supervisor. We all need a Paul. If you can find an Annie, great, and build your community. And, you know, I think this is exciting, and thank you for your time. And I'm going to stop sharing and now try and make someone else the host. How do I do that?
Probably make Rabbi Ryan the host.
I don't know, you know, you can take the Freiburg out of the boy out of Freiburg. I mean, Gavin, how do we do this?
If you hold your cursor over Rabbi Ryan's name, and it'll say make host.
Where's Ryan? Sorry about oh, Ryan Asu. How are you, Stephen? Check. Don't fall asleep. Okay.
Just go to more, make host.
I've asked mute.
Rabbi Ryan.
Make host. Okay. All right. Yes, I'm out of here. Okay. Thank you. I'm going on mute. Thank you for your time. Good luck, Rabbi.
Gary, thank you so much, because Gary's brought so much enthusiasm, skill, intelligence, and motivation to everybody. So, you know, he's a wonderful role model for people. And as he said, you know, everybody, we are still feeling our way. You know, this is new. You know, like nobody's a parent until they have a child. So here are our children, and we're learning how to look after them. And by coming together, hopefully we'll be better parents, and our children will play together. So now I'm really happy to introduce you to Rabbi Ryan Newfield. And Rabbi Ryan Newfield is talking about creating an online community from scratch. In fact, we've all been doing that, but you know, this is his way. And he's talking about the challenges faced online and suggestions of how to overcome them, and unexpected advantages and outcomes. He is from the Musenberg Hebrew congregation, and he has had international pulpit experience as a surfer, yogi, guitarist, food and adventure enthusiast. He's also a world traveler in search of God, and everywhere, always and everywhere. So Rabbi Ryan Newfield, over to you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Eli. Gary, that was great. I learned about your community. Hopefully one day I'll visit that place. I love Texas. So Texas of South Africa sounds interesting. And Juan-Paul, look forward to you afterwards. Good to see you as well. A long time. I'm speaking to you from Musenberg. I'm not going to be giving you a historical account of Musenberg, because there are 5 videos on YouTube which have been watched by thousands of people about Musenberg, said by Musenbergers from various decades. And I encourage everyone to look at that, because that is a good way of seeing what's possible about exploring our past. I will be talking, as Geraldine said, about how do you create a community online. I was faced with quite a challenge during COVID. I arrived in Musenberg a few weeks before COVID began. I'm talking about March last year. And the community in Musenberg, in terms of what's known of Jewish people and community, is quite limited and small. But I'd always been told that the community in Musenberg was very big at a certain point. It's a matter of dispute amongst people who have lived here and researchers, but it was in the hundreds of families. And now we know that those hundreds of families have people around the world, a lot of them being part of these 91 participants who are here, who I see their names, and I've seen them before, a lot of them on my talks as well. First thing to consider is the word community and the word online. Is there such a thing as a community online? Now, when you're defining the word community, a lot of people, especially within the context of a synagogue, assume that a community is people who know each other, who have interactions with each other, relationships with each other. Can one consider a community being online? Now, this is quite a valid question, especially during COVID, because some people don't like the concept of having a community online. They're not interested in coming online. They're not interested in hearing people online. If it's not face-to-face, they don't consider it real. I'm telling you what my answer to that question is, but first I'm going to go through advantages and disadvantages of what a community online versus not online is. First one, let's start off with advantages. An advantage of a community online is the cross-cultural section. Just like now, I've been seeing in the chats, we've got people from New Zealand and from Pretoria and from America and from England. So that you cannot build that in person. So an online presence is very, very powerful and very, very interesting because you can get people from all around the world. One talk that Eli Rabinovitz did in part of one of my series that I was hosting, we had directors from museums in Lithuania. We had Holocaust survivors from Hungary. Now, these are people that I've never met before, never heard of, don't even know that they exist, but all of a sudden they're talking on my program. And it's quite interesting to see those interactions happen. Another advantage of an online community is the flexibility. And what I mean by that is mostly recordings. In person, if you can't make an event, you've lost it. Whereas online, you can still be part of something by listening to the series in a recording at your own leisure. Another advantage of an online community is the comfortable way of listening to a lecture or being a part of a community. There are many people who have complained to me about how, well, they haven't complained, it's the opposite. They've said how they don't feel comfortable turning on their videos on an online chat or an online Zoom lecture because they don't like grooming themselves or, getting dressed, etc., etc., etc. So the advantage of an online system is that it's very spontaneous. You can decide to come and be a part of other people's lives at the flip of a button, and you can do it anonymously, which you can't do in person. So that's another huge advantage. And lastly, and this has a lot to do with the series that we did on Musenberg, is a reunion. So right now, I'm sure that there are people who haven't seen each other for many, many years. When it came to the series that I did about Musenberg history, I had emails saying that they haven't seen that person or heard of that person in over 55 years. Can you believe that? And then you get people interacting, asking me for their details, and are they talking to each other and they're exchanging pictures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's very, very wonderful about the power of an online community. It's going to be quite hard to argue that there is no such thing as a community online when we see these things happening. On the other hand, what are some of the negative disadvantages? So number one is it's hard to inspire and to connect people in a real way. So right now, some people are chatting to me, some of you are chatting to each other, but it's very removed. It's based on text messages and letters, whereas when you're in a room with other people, you actually feel them, you feel their presence. So that's somewhat of a disadvantage. Another disadvantage is that there's more competition. In the context of a synagogue, so where you used to live, that's where you would go, whoever the rabbi is, that's who you would go to listen to, or whoever the speakers are. They're in a context of maybe 10 by 10 kilometers. Whereas now I'm up against all of you watching BBC, watching the best speakers on earth, speaking on YouTube for free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of competition when it comes to the online space. And I think everybody knows the expression Zoom fatigue, and there's a reason for that. Third disadvantage are tech issues. Now, we've already faced in this series right now, we face some tech issues in the sense of no one really knows who is the host, how to transfer the host, et cetera, et cetera. So those types of things are tech issues that happen, but there's much larger tech issues, which are tech issues from the audience. And I'm going to show you some pictures of the tech issues that I face. And lastly, because your reach is larger. So when I'm giving a lecture to the people in Musenberg, or I'm trying to create something with the people in Musenberg, I know who they are. They all live a much similar lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas when now we're talking to the whole world with different age groups and different backgrounds, especially in the context of a synagogue. So now you need to talk a universal language. And it's much harder to do. One has to be much more expert in being able to provide something that can reach people from the far right to the far left, to the intellectuals, to the spirituals. All those types of people have to be catered for in one sitting. So that's much more challenging. Lastly, to conclude that section, I would answer, yes, there is such a thing as an online community. I would give a definition, this is my definition, of an online presence phases from education to a community where the same people see each other enough times to appreciate that they've done the same experience. In other words, when I give a lecture, it's education. But when you create a community is when people come to that lecture and they either hear the others enough times that they start listening to their voice and recognizing their voice or where they're from, or even if someone doesn't say anything. When you've been in a joint experience with someone else enough times, you feel camaraderie, regardless whether you've said something to that person ever in your life or not. So that's why I would say there is such a thing as a community online, even though some people would argue that that's not true. Okay, last little things. What are the different stages of getting a community online from scratch? So the first thing is content. And content is difficult. In terms of a Jewish community in 2021, you have to have a wide array of things. You can't just have history. You can't just have religion. You can't just have entertainment. There has to be a whole scope of different things happening all the time to keep things fresh. Lastly, I started off by giving individual lectures. So I gave one lecture on mysticism, another one on psychology, another one on nature, etc., etc., etc. And someone in education told me that they recommended that I start doing series. Instead of doing individual lectures, different ones every week, start series, which are either, 7 weeks or 5 weeks or maybe even 3 weeks, but something that people can be a part of that and feel that they've completed something, that it's almost like a course, that you've completed something in a series. And I think that was very, very useful. Stage 2 is marketing. Marketing is quite difficult because, again, you're up against Google, you're up against Facebook, you're up against people who are investing thousands of dollars into flyers, online systems, etc., etc. You can't just be old school sending, WhatsApp messages, etc., etc. It has to be fresh in order to get crowds, if that's what your aim is at. And lastly, you have to give reminders all the time. I'll share my screen in a second just to show you some ideas of marketing as well as problems with tech. So this is stage 3. Stage 3 is tech. Now, tech, one has to realize when you're in an online stage right now, I'm sure there's some people who are on their phone. There's other people who are on iPads. There's other people who are on computers. And how it looks to each person is going to be very, very different. Likewise, some people have fast internet, some people have slow internet. So one has to take all these things into account when one is giving a lecture online, because the more tech it is, the more you're ostracizing some people, at least in the context of South Africa. Maybe in America, everyone's got, high tech, but I don't think so. I remember Eli said from Australia, everything's first world except for the internet. And even in those countries, you get hard problems. Likewise, even if you've got the fast Wi-Fi and everything like that, how it looks to the audience is very, very different. And I'm going to give you some examples by showing you a screen. I'm going to be using my Apple Pen so that you can see. So I'm using a little bit of tech over here to do this. You should see my screen now. And I'm going to a program called Procreate. Now, I've taken everybody's names out of here. I apologize if you are here. But look at how some people look on Zoom. So I'm going to choose a new color, green. So for example, if this person was speaking or wanted to speak, all I'm seeing is that person's head. There's another one over here. This person has no idea that all I'm looking at is the top of their skull. So I know it looks quite funny, but when that person wants to talk, it can be off-putting to an audience to see that. Obviously, in Zoom, you've got people who don't like to put their videos on. Now, that means that you're requiring others to listen to someone when they can't see them. That can be quite tricky. I've had people who are driving when they're talking, meaning their video is on, but you're watching them while they are driving a car. That can also be, a little bit of an interesting dynamic of how that works. Over here, in this one, someone chose a background of Zoom. Now, on this audience, what we have now, I'm sure some of you are looking at that as well. Often in Zoom, when you pick a background, you don't see the person itself. Over here, it's very, very dark. So that would be a problem as well. So I'm just giving an example of some of the problems that happen with tech from a host perspective that you need to be aware of if you want to get the most out of creating a good experience. Here's an example of one of the parts I did of remembering Musenberg. So Gavin, this is a little bit more what you were doing on a much smaller scale. So these were pictures sent to me by speakers of all the hotels. And I think one's a pharmacy over there. Here's the Musenberg Art Center. And here are all pictures of the speakers that spoke previously, which I put all together. So when one looks at this and says, wow, you're looking at a grand finale of multiple speakers, you already get the audience because you've seen them, as well as things that have been sent to you in the past. I think that becomes quite interesting for people to see. And yes, you're up against Google, so you have to be able to do that. Just to conclude, I think my time is almost up, but just some of the nice things, some of the outcomes that happen. First of all, I mentioned people haven't seen each other for decades. That's wonderful. When you go to the next level where people are sharing media like photos, so you might have not remembered a certain experience in your life, but when you see that someone that you don't know has a picture of you doing that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, that already creates a bond. And I got so many people asking me for other people's email addresses, and they connected and they all thanked me because it's wonderful to be able to share that media and content. Lastly, a point of location. So many people found each other. I don't know if this means that they're not on Facebook, but people found each other through a community online, and that's another thing. Databasing, unbelievable opportunities to increase databasing. Believe it or not, people want to be on databases. I thought people would hate to be on databases, but the more offering you can give them on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Zoom, on whatever else it is, on Instagram, the more people will connect. And lastly, collaboration. So this is an example of a collaboration where I don't know Gavin, I don't know Geraldine, but I met Eli, who came to one of my audiences of one of the programs, and he connected me. And now who knows where we'll go in the future. So there's a lot of future collaborations that can happen on the online space. And I think the more people realize, even post-COVID, the power of online, the more the Jewish communities around the world will be able to connect. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And would you like me to make Juan-Paul the next host?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Ryan, that was absolutely wonderful. You just crunched everything so perfectly into what were the advantages and the disadvantages.
With pleasure.
And I think it's really, really helpful. When I did some Zoom reunions for Kimberley, the most common comment was, you look just like I remember your dad or your mom. And, that's how they felt. So, all these things are really important, and you really express them so beautifully. And also the way that we connect, and seeing everybody here and seeing their names gives us the feeling that CHOL, the community history online, can also become a community of people who are interested. And as Gavin already mentioned, we'd like to put together an email list, sort of an academic email list that doesn't have adverts and funny things, but where we can all contribute information and ideas and learn from each other on a continuing basis. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to call on Jean-Paul Burke, and he is going to talk to us about the Woodstock and Salt River Hebrew Congregation collection at the South African Jewish Museum Archive. It's been interesting to know what he's going to do with this, the goals, steps, and experience of creating the digital archive collection for the South African Jewish Museum. So Jean-Paul Burke is a freelance copy editor, librarian, archivist, and historical researcher, somebody full of ideas and enthusiasm from Pretoria in South Africa. So JP, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so yeah, so community history online. So what I'm going to be presenting is, as we said, so last week we said Leila discussed the South African Jewish Museum digital archive. So she gave like a nice overview. So what I'm doing is focusing on a specific collection, and we'll see how we actually, it's not up yet, but we'll see how it's been, this process that we've been involved with of actually getting it into to be ready to be set up to be uploaded. So yeah, so she's the general, this is more specific. So here, so let me just give you an example. I'll share screen. I'm going to share screen so that we can, then I'll just show you an example of where we headed in terms of, so here, if you can see, if you can see this is, you should be seeing the South African Jewish Museum archives online. So this is just an example I'll show you of what it might look like once it's up. So just give one example. Right, so I'm just going to type in here. A Mervish collection. I'll just use that as to demonstrate what we have here. So you see, you can see also, you can see as I'm going through how we navigating to this collection. So here you'll see there's different categories of how we're categorizing the different information. So here it's a digital archive. So we got here the collection name, a Mervish collection. So here it would be Woodstock, Salt River, Hebrew Congregation. And here then you got the name there, and then you got different categories. Here we call it series. So you could call it like a folder. Here we got 8 Mervish photographs, for example. And then you'll have more detailed categories. And then items. Here there's items. So here I'll just give you an example. And for each thing, so you'll have what they call metadata, information about the item. So here you'll have a series of items. You can scroll, and here's information, for example, title, etc., and various information about this item. Who's the donator? Who's in the picture? Okay. Right, so that's just an example. Let me just see another. It's another now. Quickly, there's a nice photo here. Quickly, I want to show you. So here's, for example, here's Rabbi Mervish and 2 grandkids, and then various details. Here, for example, photograph of Cape Town Jewish community leader and Beit Din Rabbi Moses Chaim Mervish, Julian Press, Lee Mervish, and young Cecil Mervish, taken in Breeder Street, Cape Town, 1945. So again, you'll see various information. So this is also part of the process. It's actually getting this information about this. And okay, so there I've just shown you that. Now, next thing. So what I'd like to just, so that's where that's part of the goals. What I'm saying is I'm going to show you about the goals and the steps and the various experiences that we experienced going through this. So the goal is really to put up an archive online, but now that's just one of them, of the Woodstock's Salt River Hebrew Congregation. So really, what kind of archive are we looking at here? What kind of online community history? So this is part of it, is the various goals that leads to this. So it's not just purely taking the physical items and putting everything up. There's other goals that guide exactly what's going up. And that's also that here we're also looking at something that's going to be more academic, looking to do a so we're looking to do a academic process of keeping to international standards of digital archiving. And so that's, for example, let's see here, I've got to admit people. Sorry, admitting people. So for example, like this was really highlighted when you have the Jager Library fire in Cape Town at UCT. That there was really people who didn't realize that, you know, so there was a fire at UCT, part of the library got burnt and part of the archives got damaged. So a lot of material was lost. The whole film collection was lost. So people said, isn't that digitized? What's going on? We live in 4IR. This is like the new technology. We should be using it. Surely it's digitized by now. So this is part of the thing, is that, I mean, the head archivist, part of the response explaining is really the archives are vast. You can't digitize everything at once. There's also, they want to keep this laborious process. You've got to, there's keeping to international standards, and there's vast archives at UCT, for example. And like I showed you, there's the metadata, there's information about the items that you put up, and they've got fancy equipment and, you know, experienced people putting up the items, etc. And then you've got to prioritize. In fact, UCT has a dedicated digitization unit with 3 to 5 people working there. So it's not so simple that everything gets digitized. So this is also part of it. So this is now more like I'll show you part of this process. But then there's also the push. Also now, from in light of the Jager Library, what happened there is that there's some academics who are saying, just get the stuff up there. We need to research, especially with this pandemic. We can't access the archives. You know, do at least a rough, take your cell phone and do a rough digitalization so that at least the information's up later on when it comes to the queue. So then you can, when it's that item's turn in the queue, so you do it properly. So there is that push as well, especially for historians. You know, they rely on archives. So anyway, so that's just a bit of context. So right. So then the other thing I wanted to say, yeah. So right, and then also another goal. So that's 2 goals. There's academic standards, and one is to put up this archive in the Jewish Museum archive, and then there's another thing, is the social history aspect of it. So this particular this South African Jewish Museum archive, it's more like a social history thing. Is we're trying to capture, in a way, we're not putting everything up. We want to, in a way, we're trying to put a community online, capture the sense of the community or the collection. You know, so what are we trying to do here with Woodstock Salt River Hebrew Congregation? It's really, so we're trying to get a comprehensive sense of what it was. It's not just putting up documents. So there's also, we've been selective what we're putting up. You know, we're not going to put up all the minutes. We're not going to put up all the financial reports. You know, so that'll remain in the physical. But it's so therefore we look at the audio. We look at not just pictures, audio, videos, essays, articles. That's also, you know, items, pictures of items. So that's also to get and also across time periods. So that's also part of it. And sometimes this might override other goals, because, you know, you might not get your ideal quality picture, but it adds something to the archive, so you put it up. And then maybe later you'll get a better quality. So that's also part of it as well. Okay, and then I'd like to add a 4th goal, which is maybe more personal, but I think it's also something to realize what we're busy with here, is that there's also mitzvahs involved when you're dealing with this kind of thing. You're putting things up publicly. So also to realize that, in a way, it's like there's a pasuk in Mishnah, it says, chapter 10, verse 7, in Proverbs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. You know, many of you probably remember this. This idea is that it's remembering people for a blessing. So it's a memorial, in a way, like a Yizkor as well, that people have passed. So it's keeping their memory alive. And so that's also this idea. And also, like the Rambam Maimonides says, there's 5 parts of speech. And And he goes through, one of them basically is Ahu, Lashon Ahu, beloved speech, which has to do with speech that praises character or achievements that people have had in the past. So that's also something that you're busy with. So it's something also that people can learn from people from the past, what was achieved, and can inspire, and also good people that have been in the various communities or in this particular community can, praising quality, something to learn from. And then on the other side of it is also, which is now again, this is part of what adds to what actually goes up, because the other side of it is that you don't want to publicize old variables. Why? It's not necessary. Those who were involved, they know about it. And every community has these. Is it really necessary to publicize old variables? No. So and then also like Lashon Hara, defamation. So that's another consideration. So these are also serious things that, to consider. Can't just put anything up online. Not so simple. When you look at it from a Torah perspective, from a spiritual perspective as well. So that is okay. So then, all right. So those are 4 goals. Let's see. I better hurry up. Hey, time's going. So okay. So let me just then some of the steps. So I'll just introduce. There's a bit of a team. Introduce what's going on here. So we have a team actually involved in this project. So it's about 7 people involved. I'm the team. My role is like the team leader in terms of seeing that this actually happens, seeing it through to its end. It actually gets up. And also part of my role is locating possible sources and collating the material that comes in, putting it into a central location. So then once it's in a central location, you can see what you got. And it's better to determine what goes up. And then also later on, the metadata. So that will be on each item, collecting information from people and finding information about the items, like who took the picture, where is this picture, the context of it, and who's in the picture, getting names and the dates and etc. So that kind of thing as well. So we also got this Leila and Katie. They the archivists, the ladies at this Jewish museum. Katie's at the Kaplan Centre at the UCT archives, and they also they like the technical support, and they help me with their requirements for this project, because I'm coming in as I said, like a freelancer coming in to assist with this project. So then they're overseeing what I'm doing as well. I report to them, and then they help me with a bit of training with the metadata or technical requirements. And then also, Kate, something that you might not realize is I'm actually talking from Pretoria, and all the materials there sitting in UCT. So in today's world, you can do things like this. So Katie goes around with the actual archives that are at UCT, so helping to digitize it there. Okay, and then also we got 3 Woodstockers who represent that Woodstock network. So it's of the people who actually were there, and they got a vast network of people who were Cecil Gelbert, Herschel Gelbert, and Harold Idisis, and they're all Woodstockers who really they've themselves have contributed much material, but they've also got this vast network that's then also bring in further material. So that's also important, because this is, and they also really, you could say, the producers, they organized the funding for this to happen. So it's important to see also that this is happening also because of their interest in it and their desire for this memorialization really of this Woodstock Hebrew congregation to go online. Okay, so now let me just show you a little bit. Okay, so this steps really, that's the team. So that's the team, first of all. So steps really, first of all, is, I should also mention there was Bronwyn Kruger, who I took over from. She couldn't continue, but she also laid the foundation for the role that I took over. Her notes were very helpful in catching me up. And so that's really, also that was my first step, catching up, because I came in the middle of the project. So, okay, so steps. So identify possible sources for material, and then collate material into a central location, and then make drafts of what will go in, and then the metadata, and then actually upload. So where we're up to now is that we pretty much at the draft stage. We haven't started metadata in full swing yet. So that's where we're up to now. And also the timeline of this project is, I mean, I've only been involved in about a month. So, and it's not, you know, it's not a full-time thing. It's every now and again. So it's, so really the material that we're collecting is from within a short space of time. And it's also to realize that, yeah, so we're really relying on other people and what has been done in the past. For example, there was like in Freiburg, you had someone there who was collecting almost like the informal community archivist. So you built on his material. So there was also someone here, Alex Rubin and Mike Getz. Also, they were like the informal archivists of Woodstock River that over the years they collected amazing material. So that's also helpful already to have a head start. But really, it's about setting up a foundational collection online that can attract more material. So it's really something to start with, and it's not it's not the end of the road. In other words, you know, it's something to really to start with off. That something gets put up, and that's so now get into some of the. Let me just do a quick example of. Let me just move this here. Let me do a quick example. If I've got, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes left, I don't know. But let me do a quick example of just an experience. There's various experiences I could share, but let me just show you an example going through the steps. So here I've got an email. We found a nice picture of, of a chocolate box. Woodstock, Salt River chocolate box for Simcha Stora. Right, so how did I get to this? So let me show you in the Kaplan Centre. I was browsing, and sometimes this is just an example. You could say serendipity is also part of it, or you could say hashkacha pratit, divine intervention. But sometimes you have these examples where you just come across things when you're doing something else, and you're not necessarily looking for it. So it's a curiosity. So there's this online. This is also something that for a future talk that Gwen put up here, Gwen Robbins, Shira put up a web exhibition at the Kaplan Centre of Moderator. And where was it? Anyway, there was a mention here where she said of, by the way, there was a mention of a chocolate box that the Woodstock congregation had. That so here you see here there's a nice example here where I'll just read it quickly. The large number. Okay. So here this was offering to present 100 boxes of chocolate for the children for Simchat Torah. The plain boxes with the name of the congregation would be more appropriate than fancy boxes. The large number indicates the congregation was beginning to attract worshippers, customers for chocolates. So I was just talking about chocolates for the Simchat Torah, and then in the note she says here, actually, you know, by the way, the Cape Jewish Board of Deputies collection contains chocolate boxes from the Maitland and Woodstock congregations. Each has a little photo of the synagogue. Right, so now that's a lead. So that's just a nice little example, you know, that you come across, and that's besides, you know, obviously working your networks, and so this is just curiosity that you looking for something else, and then so we got someone to go. Katie went and some photos, and then this is just an example. I'm not going to put all these up on the archive, but this is again the measurements gives you an idea, the different sides of the box. So this one's a bit clearer. This is a nice, clearer picture than the other one, a bit more fuzzy. So, okay, this is nice. So what do? I'll just load this up to, what do? I take this straight to Google Drive, and that's where I collate it. And then I go to the Google Drive, for example, here. I'll just show you quickly here. There's categories already. You could say like the folders, the series that you saw earlier. So, for example, here, where was this? Leadership errors, right? So we put here, for example, leadership errors, and you had, this was been 1940. So here we go, marks. So here you got some marks. You should have a chocolate box. There it is. So there we've just put it in a That's how we've just collated it. And that's just an example. We've used Google Drive to put all the information into one place. And then from there, we go and we take a, I don't know how much time I've got left here, maybe let's wrap up there. Then we develop themes. So where is it? Here is a draft. The themes, or the you could say themes, or are basically another way of saying the.
So JP, I think we've got a very nice idea of how you're working on these things. I wonder whether we should open this now for questions for people to ask you and ask our other panelists. Because I'm sure there are lots of comments people want to make or questions they want to ask, even if they're not specifically about these presentations, but about the whole idea of community history online in general. So if you can make me the host again, that would be helpful. Then I think if people want to now move your view to gallery view, then you see who's there. And also, if you want to ask a question, you can either raise a virtual hand. That would be helpful if you know how to do that, because that then will bring you right up to the top, and I can ask you to unmute and ask your own question. Or you can raise your hand and I'll just try and see that it's in the picture, and I will then see how. So put your cameras on if you can. And who would like to ask one of our panelists, or just talk in general about the whole idea of community history online? Let me, okay, where are you? Put your hand up again. Bernie Radomski, could you unmute and ask your question? That's it. Good.
Okay. My question is basically starting from scratch, just to get some sort of idea as to the type of approach one would make to past congregants or their children or grandchildren in the form of a questionnaire or what, just to get this thing started. How does one actually begin those contacts?
Okay, shall I take that for the moment? Bernie, perhaps you could just tell us where you're speaking from and what community you're from.
Cape Town.
Okay. The way you have to start is you need the driver. You need as Gary has said, the Meshuggah who wants to do this and make sure that it's going to happen. Then you need a mailing list. And Rabbi Silverhuft can possibly help you, or you may know some people. As long as you've got a little critical mass, you send out some, call it a news sheet, a newsletter, a letter, an introduction, telling them what you want to do, enthusiasm them. And yes, there is a questionnaire you can ask. We have one on the Kimberley website. If you go to the Kimberley community website and the contact page, you'll see that it asks, what is your name? When, your year of birth. We don't ask for a date of birth because we don't want to compromise any bank details. So we ask for your year of birth, we ask when you were in this town, when you left, why you left. Then we ask your marital status, we ask you where your partner comes from, where you live now, where your children are, but we also ask about your parents. Where were your parents born? Your mother, your father, when did they come to the town? What did they do? Where are they buried? And your grandparents, your maternal, Now, you might send that out to 100 people and 3 or 4 might reply, but don't be downhearted, because when you can then refer back to the others and say, oh, I've heard from so-and-so and they're doing this and they've shown me that. And by the way, do you remember this? So it builds up, you know, it's not an easy process, but you are building both a community and an archive. So I think, does that answer your question a bit?
Well, I think that's very, very helpful, and I would love to see that questionnaire. Is there can you give me the website for Kimberley, or is this not
just
a good
go to Kimberley Jewish Community website and you'll find it. It's the
Thank you very much.
Would anybody else like to come in on and give their thoughts on this? I can't always see who's wanting to speak, but so, you know, we're very willing to help. And if you listen, Bernie, to what I spoke about last week on the South African Jewish Museum website, I gave you the stages, you know, start with your view, get your mailing list, send out your letters, and then find a webmaster. And this is what you should put on the website. And I'm just wondering, you know, that it's wonderful to have the South African Jewish Museum archives, which are so clear, which are so important, but maybe you also need all the other platforms, you know. The website kind of puts it in a way that is both community and history, and it's all clickable and it's all there, and it's somehow easier to get around. Any other comments or questions? Alex, go on. Alex Klein, just say where you're speaking from and what community. Unmute. Unmute.
Right. Hi, Geraldine. I'm from Manchester, United Kingdom. I find this fascinating as an outsider looking in, as a historian, and it's just incredible. But certain things that were mentioned today for historical reasons made me think. One was to do with intermarriage or marrying out because of the necessity. And I don't understand how that happens when there are other communities in South Africa, like Johannesburg and Cape Town, where there are plenty of Jews, or other places where other shidduchim or other people could be introduced to families. As you can see with the historical, this one from Cape Town married that one from Kimberley, and this one from Joburg married that one from so and so. So how was that possible? What was the spiritual leadership like in some of these communities? Or did people turn their back and say, well, that's the way it is, that's the way it is, and live and let live? And the other question was, we hear about racism, anti-Semitism, and how the Afrikaans people are within themselves. How did that affect the Jewish communities, or the smaller Jewish communities? And is this the problem, that why they left? They came in because of commerce, mines, gold, diamonds, etc. They happened to own the hotels, which again was quite strange for me to hear. So all these are questions for me that fascinate me. And is there any answers? Okay. I know there's not a short answer, but can I be put in the right direction, please?
Let's see who'd like to answer. Gary, would you like to come in on that? Unmute, unmute, unmute. Unmute, Gary.
Okay, all right.
That's good.
So if you're an historian, you'll be well aware that, I mean, I'm giving you a sort of a gross number, but for every 2 men who migrated from Eastern Europe, there was maybe 1 woman, or there was just a shortage of significant Jewish others. And, you know, there's a guy on this call called Selwyn Souchet, whose member family, Elias Helfer, was in Geluk in the middle of nowhere. You know, he found solace in his foreman's daughter. Okay. there were people who just didn't have partners. I don't think they kind of went to turn their back. It was just, there was a shortage of partners, and certainly in small towns. And, you know, you assuming people could travel. It was a schlep to get these places, and not every Jewish woman. I mean, in my community, most of our mothers were Afrikaners who converted, and it was well known that the backbone of the Freiburg community were, you know, Afrikaans women. It's an incredible phenomenon which also needs research. You know, you had Rita Muscat, and the woman who taught me Hebrew was an Afrikaans woman, Esme Vermaak, who married Chibi Raf. Okay, so it cuts both ways. So I think, you know, if you're an historian, you appreciate that that was just the story of migration. In terms of rabbis, I mean, it wasn't easy. You know, Rabbi Kaplan was sent to South Africa by Rav Cook to do outreach. But, you know, he has a man who had a degree in music, I think 6 degrees, studied to be a Moyle, wrote books, this huge intellectual stuck in the Kalahari. You know, I mean, he built a mikveh. I mean, so it wasn't easy being a rabbi in a community that wasn't that into it, you know, and these people were frustrated, and you sort of, again, I don't have the archives, it wasn't easy, but they also kind of made their peace. There was one rabbi who I thought was, I think, really quite liberal. I would say in politics, most Jews, we like to sort of say we were these big card-carrying ANC members today, but I think, you know, Jews living in these towns had to make their peace with the local surroundings. And so, you know, I don't think Jews were more liberal. I mean, I think they were more liberal, but, you know, there was a certain reality. And I think, you know, anti-Semitism was part of our lives. You know, Avi Hechter remembers, you know, people throwing stones on, but it was just part of country life. It wasn't worse. Obviously, in the war, it was worse with the grey shirts. So those are some of the issues. I see that we have Selwyn Leibovitz online. Selwyn, I need photos of your family. And the Souchets, I need photos of Elias Helfer. One thing I will say is, for example, in Jewish custom, you don't bury people who cross the line, who marry out in the Jewish cemetery. In Freiburg, Jews who had non-Jewish partners were buried. In fact, we were kind of like a place where the Kurland Jews who had strayed were buried. And I think that was Old Man Liebethal's legacy. There was a tolerance. So that's why in Freiburg, there's a guy, Nicholas Friedberg, who married an Afrikaans woman. I mean, so I think, you know, Jews in these country areas had to make their own peace, and sort of they had their own unique way of living on these boundaries and having an identity. I always say Kimberley was Riga and Freiburg was Talsen. You know, sort of we're a shtetl compared to Kimberley. So that's enough from me. Okay,
brilliant. Thanks, Gary. Rabbi Ryan, did you want to say something on this subject? No? You're okay? You're muted anyway. Shall we go to Itamar Shine then, if you want to ask your question or make your comment? Unmute. Yeah.
Hello.
Good.
Hello.
Right. Good.
Yeah. No, I just was touched by Bernie Radomski's message, because I'm trying to think of starting a type of a reunion or for all ex-Bloemfonteинers. I come from Bloemfontein. I now live in London. And Geraldine has helped me quite a lot. I had a chat with Geraldine and I had a chat with Eli. And I hope to develop this relationship with Geraldine and Eli as helpful people to try and get me going. And I think Bernie could do the same. And, you know, we might veer off in different directions, but we could easily become members of a large family.
Indeed. That's great. We'll be very happy to help you, because, you know, we've seen what, as Rabbi Ryan Newfield has said, what joy it gives to the people to reconnect with each other after so long and to think about it. And as Natalie Sussman, are you still there, Natalie? Because Natalie has wonderful ways of saying what we've done to Kimberley means to people in Kimberley. So do you think you could unmute Natalie or Laura and say something about that? Let's just close that. Hi.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Well, I would like to say that thanks to Geraldine, Kimberley people have reconnected. We were a very important community, going right back to the diamond fields when diamonds were discovered. Cecil John Rhodes was the outlier. The rest were all Jews. From the diamonds, discovery of diamonds started the economy of this country. And the economy was in the hands of the Jews. The Afrikaner was an agricultural man, content to be so. Now, Geraldine has told the story of a community which all but exists. And thanks to Geraldine, our story is going to be remembered. Geraldine's parents were very prominent. Her dad was the only surgeon in town. And we were grateful in Kimberley to have a man like that. Geraldine's mom was very active in the Union of Jewish Women. We were a close-knit community, and we have remained a close-knit community. We are still in contact, but everybody has left. And I would like to ask Gary, do you remember the Sussmans of Kimberley? You do. Did you know my husband was Cecil Sussman? They farmed at Platfontein, and your dad was a farmer. So my father-in-law and Cecil would have met up with your family at at cattle sales. And did you have a Betty Sussman? I remember not.
We're not related. So the Kimberley Sussman, we from Tukums in Latvia, and you guys are Lithuanian, but we won't hold it against you. But I remember at boarding school, I mean, when my brother and I were at Kimberley Boys High, I mean, the clients used to host us, but we were there sort of in the 80s. So we remember, and I think there was a Dr. Sussman at the time. But we're very well-known big meat family. We know, we're aware of you, and your farms were bigger than ours.
Okay. You know, this is just showing how the connections come. I think we've all learned a lot about each other. I've learned about the Kimberley community. I left Kimberley when I was 16, just going 17. I knew nothing about the communities in Kimberley. I knew a small number of people who were mainly my family. So to me, this journey is a journey of discovery. And I'm sure that anybody who embarks on it would be happy. Leon, would you like to unmute and say something? Just say where you're speaking
Hi, good morning or good evening or good afternoon. I'm Leon Chun and I live in Toronto, and I've been a great supporter of Geraldine and of the Kimberley website. I've also tried to promote the Kehila links in general on behalf of Eli here in Toronto, and that it's very difficult to get people to participate, to tell their stories. And the only way I believe that you can encourage more participants is by promotion and advertising and explaining to the Jewish community or the former South African Jewish community living abroad the importance of preserving our heritage is through the promotion of the sites. And one problem I see is that we've got so many of them. Kahila Links is one of them, and the Museum's got another one, you know, and I believe now Gary has got his own. So it's so difficult to explain to people the importance of this if you've got to tell them that you've got to run around the websites to try and find all this history. And I would really encourage all participants here to try and form an umbrella body and try and merge all this information or link this information so that when you tell them, go to Kahila Links and look at the Kimberley website, you'll not only find the Kimberley website, it'll link to the SA Museum, it'll link perhaps to somebody else's who might have another website of their own, but it's got to come through promotion. And, you know, I'm not that familiar with how one would promote this, but certainly there must, amongst all of us, we must have some sort of ideas of how we can encourage expat South Africans to participate in preserving our heritage. Thanks.
Thank you, Leon. I think you'll recognize that this is exactly what we're doing by creating community history online. And it will grow organically as it wants to grow. And we see from the faces who are here and the nods that we get that ideas are disseminating and that we will be able not to put everybody in the same box, but to make the links so that everybody can find everybody else. And we also look forward perhaps to making an email list where we can talk to people more easily. And perhaps, you know, as Gavin said, he's going to ask you if you'd like to participate in that. So I would just like to thank our three speakers today who've really opened up enormous opportunities and challenges for us, to Gary and to Rabbi Ryan Newfield and to Juan-Paul Burke, showing us what is happening, what can happen, how it can happen, giving us all ideas. So thank you so much. A huge thank you to Gavin to facilitate this and to host it. He's been a wonderful colleague and a really exciting person to work with. So Gavin, I'm going to hand it back to you now to close the meeting for today. So unmute and you can wrap up for this session. Thank you to everybody who's been here and who's been talking to us and talking to each other. Gavin, unmute.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, everybody, for attending. As Leon alluded to and as Geraldine answered, this is the purpose of this talk and this series, is to connect people who have an interest in our communal history and start the process. The hopeful outcome is that we'll have a community who's involved, a single list in place where everybody can find these various sources. And as Gary said, you know, sometimes it's difficult to get people engaged and you end up chasing your tail a bit and chasing other people. And similarly, if you are struggling to get a connection and a community going, as Itamar was referring to with regards to Bloemfontein, which I'm happy to help, seeing I'm part of the Bloemfontein Morrises, Itamar, is what I can suggest is that if you go or contact the Jewish Museum, what we do is we have a space where you can have your own family collections held online. So even if you don't get that far ahead and you're not able to build a community for your particular congregation or home or town, you can secure your family history. So a generation or two down the line, if somebody else tries to pick up the baton, they will find the details of your family readily available in our archives and can build them across. So you don't necessarily have to build a site for an entire community. You can start just with your family. And as I say, the Jewish Museum Archives will hold that family history for you. We'll send you details and help you to format it in the right manner and capture the details so it's all there. Now, we will continue this program next week, Wednesday at the same time. You should be able to use the same login links that you used today. We will send out a reminder as well. We'll have our final sessions then, which will include Katie Garin from the Kaplan Centre Archives, who will tell you what other archival resources are out there as well. I'm very grateful that you all joined us. And then once these 3 sessions are over, it's not going to end there. We will contact each and every one of you. There were over 200 people who subscribed to this. Not everybody was on today. And we will engage you and develop a community where we can lean and learn from each other. I see there are a lot of messages and so on coming in. I'm not going to be able to respond to all of that. But I want to say thank you very much for joining us. Please join us again next week. Look out for further communication from the museum, from Geraldine. And yeah, I see a few clapping hands, so thank you very much. And have a lovely day. Please, everybody, stay safe. Your stories are important. And we'd like to hear from you. And I'm sure many others on this call will be able to communicate with you and share experiences. So thank you very much. Please join us next Wednesday at 11 o'clock, and we will go on from there. Have a lovely time. And thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Gavin, and goodbye, everybody.